Hello, students, and welcome to this edition of Psych Chats. Here we will be talking about an introduction to social psychology. There is an old proverb that talks about how laughter is the best medicine, or more specifically, Proverbs 17:22 in the American Standard Version says, "A cheerful heart is a good medicine, but a broken spirit drieth up the bones." So we don't want any dry bones here. Some versions say a joyful spirit is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries the bones. So I wanted to share with you something funny I heard to share a little cheer. It is, why did the APA scholars, peers, call her a fashionista? Again, why did the APA scholars, peers, call her a fashionista? Because she had such amazing APA style. I thought that was cute. I couldn't resist. All right, so let's start. Let's kind of roll up our sleeves here, if you will, and dive in to this discussion on what is social psychology, starting with a definition. According to Bryan and colleagues, social psychology has been defined as the scientific field that seeks to understand the nature and causes of individual behavior and thought in social situations. So we can see that social psychology is a bit more focused on normal trends in development and behavior, where clinical psychology has had a bit more focus on pathology and abnormal development. And we'll talk more about how to parse those out, but it is very difficult to identify and separate out the definitions because there is a lot of overlap between clinical and social psychology, but we will discuss that in more detail in just a moment. Let's look at the background of social psychology. So what about the background? You might be wondering, has social psychology always involved the study of a normal behavior, or has it, there's very few absolutes in life, so we'll say, has it traditionally involved the study of normal behavior, and clinical psychology involved the study of abnormal or pathological behavior? Well, if you said that's true, then you, according to Maddox and Tagney, are correct. So it is true that social psychology has traditionally involved the study of normal behavior, and clinical psychology has been more involved with the study of abnormal or pathological behavior. According to Tyler, 1972, if you want to answer the question, what was counseling psychology as a field originally established upon, I found Tyler's content really interesting because I graduated from the School of Psychology and Counseling at Regent University and was really interested in the intersection of both psychology and counseling. And according to Tyler, first, counseling psychology did establish itself as a field specializing in normal adjustment problems rather than severe forms of psychopathology. So I think of normal adjustment challenges as things like Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, where Erikson talks about the different crises that we face at each stage of development and that we seek to resolve in order to continue progressing through the developmental stages. Thus, many counseling psychologists have found that the way that they understood adjustment in social psychology was really well aligned and matched up with the clinical interventions that they were using in counseling psychology. And another trend in the field is that there's been a shift and gradual movement from intrapsychic to interpersonal models. We're understanding more and more how much of what we deal with is interpersonal. And we'll talk more about that as we dive into the science of attachment as well. But first, what was social psychology focused on in the early years? So we talked about the focus on normal development and the focus trends towards interpersonal development. But what more specifically was one of the focuses? So according to Maddox and Tagney, social psychology deals with many different aspects of the self. And in the early years, the primary focus is what Rosenberg measured with his assessment. The Rosenberg self-esteem scale primarily focused on self-esteem. And although clinical psychology and social psychology are separate fields, it's very important to note that there are trends that are changing that. And what are those trends specifically? Well, according to Maddox and Tagney, there's a trend in social psychology moving towards integration. with clinical psychology. So the two fields integrating and overlapping more. And I find this interesting if you think about Dan Siegel's work. He spends a lot of time discussing what mental health is, defining mental health. And part of his definition is this idea of moving towards integration. And I think specifically of neural integration, the corpus callosum, where we think about the right left hemisphere integration in terms of how the brain is working. We've often talked about the logical left, if you will. Let's turn this around here. The logical left, where you've got math and science, and then the more artistic right side of the brain. But it's a bit of an oversimplification because there's so much neural integration in so many areas that are firing at the same time during various neural processes. But we do know that that certain processes are happening on the left side of the brain. So if we think about Broca's area, that is associated with our speech. It's called Broca's area. It's the brain script writer, and it finishes its work right before we open our mouth and say what we're going to say. It is truly writing our script as we're speaking. And then there's Wernicke's area, which is involved in language comprehension. So when I'm sharing this content with you using Broca's area to write the script, and in your mind, Wernicke's area is at work in your brain to interpret that information. And then if we were in a discussion in the classroom and you were to share a thought back with me, or reflection and observation, and I was processing that, and I'd be using Broca's area and Wernicke's area, which are both on what we call the logical left side of the brain. But as we're attuning to one another's facial expressions, emotion, and things like that, the attuned right brains are also interacting. So, side note, if you have spoken any Spanish, you might have known that boca is the word for mouth. So one way to remember Broca's area is if you think boca and mouth for scriptwriter. But just a side note there. But the idea here is that there is that trend in moving towards an integration of social psychology and clinical psychology. So what about attachment? We talked about how there is this trend towards the interpersonal, looking at relationships between individuals rather than within the individual. And attachment is the science that unpacks those interpersonal dynamics and our different styles of relating. Research that originated in the early days with John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth at the Tavistock Clinic in London unpacked 3 different attachment styles. And then a student of Mary Ainsworth, Mary Main, later on in her work with colleagues at UC Berkeley, developed the adult attachment interview, the AAI, which has been considered the gold standard in attachment research, along with Bob Marvin, who was separately working at UVA, but he was also a student of Mary Ainsworth, who now runs the Ainsworth Attachment Clinic in Charlottesville, Virginia. And in Bob Marvin's work, he worked many years with Dr. Ainsworth, and he's focused his work on the circle of security and continues to do work there, really helpful work with foster care and families with adoption and attachment. And Dr. Gary Sipsey and I have been through trainings with both of these individuals, so we'd like to say that we've touched the hand that touched the hand, right? Back to our sort of grandparents, if you will. Think of John Bowlby as the father of attachment and Mary Ainsworth as his research partner, and then their offspring, Mary Main and Bob Marvin, and us as their offspring. We continue to study under those folks and have studied directly with them. So I had a picture taken with Bob Marvin and said, "Oh, Bob, I would love to get a picture with you so I can literally say I have touched the hand that touched the hand." So I'll have to show that to you sometime in another video with more information on attachment. If you'd like to hear more about that, just let me know. But anyway, with a group of colleagues, we started studying God attachment and looking at how people sometimes interact with God as an attachment figure. And Kirkpatrick has done a lot of research on how people interact with God as an attachment figure. Um, and one of the things that we found was that after going through different interventions that involved prayer and mindful meditation and a whole series of research-based interventions, we found that people's attachment-related avoidance decreased as a function of this training. There wasn't a movement at least not statistically significant movement in attachment-related anxiety, but we did see a shift in avoidance. On the other hand, doing some empathy development workshops, we used different research-based strategies to help promote empathy, and we did see a shift towards the reduction of attachment-related anxiety. So in a combination of different research studies, one of the things that we are observing is that people can significantly change in their attachment styles or in their relationship styles to move towards higher levels of functioning, less anxiety, less avoidance, and higher levels of security and comfort with closeness, and greater levels of coherence in terms of making sense of their relationship stories. And this leads to a very powerful therapeutic factor, what Irvin Yalom called the installation of hope. And so we have found that you're not stuck with the attachment style that you have. You can make it better. You can grow to become more secure over time. But it is important to know what your attachment relationship style is and also what your secondary style is. Remember, denial heals nothing. When I was trained as a coder in the AAI, we always got in the practice of listing both primary and secondary styles. So I do think that's important. In the book, The 4 Relationship Styles, attachment styles are recast as professions to put on the lens of social and positive psychology to look at each relationship style in terms of what they have overcome rather than pathology. So the firefighter is someone who has walked through fires of loss and or abuse and has often developed resilience and a sense of overcoming challenges and a capacity to deal with difficult people and painful emotions. The security guard tends to be highly independent and keep others at arm's length. They tend to develop high levels of competence, independence, and highly value their freedom. The investigator has developed keen observational skills and is good at reading the emotions of others, but maybe at times asleep to their own emotions. And then the networker really enjoys connecting with others, sharing and hearing other stories, and is low in anxiety, low in avoidance, and high in terms of comfort with closeness. And we'll talk more about the different styles as the semester goes on, or as the term goes on, but it's important to know what your style is. These images are taken from Amazon. The listing for the book, The 4 Relationship Styles, the graphics are created by, so the image credit goes to Baker Books. But I also recommend this book in the top right corner called Attachments, Why You Love, Feel, and Act the Way You Do by Dr. Tim Clinton and Gary Sibsey. It is an excellent text on attachment. I really like the way they conceptualize the styles, as well as Redeeming Attachment, written with Dr. Gary Sibsey. That is a clinician's guide to helping people with attachment. So we'll be drawing from these various sources as well as many peer-reviewed articles throughout the course of the term and unpacking more about how interpersonal dynamics and specifically attachment dynamics help inform social psychology. So you might be wondering, well, why? Why is attachment so important in psychology? Well, let me tell you that the AAI interview, I spent about 2 years going through training to get certified as an adult attachment interview coder, and it has been considered a gold standard in attachment assessment and is recommended. It's a very powerful assessment. However, it can be a bit cost prohibitive. It's an hour-long semi-structured interview. It requires that the interview be recorded and then transcribed according to a specific protocol and then coded by a trained coder. If it's used for research purposes, of course, triangulation is always recommended. But trained and certified coders have already demonstrated in a rate of reliability of above 80%. A colleague of ours, Dean Dozier, his codes AAIs for an eating disorder clinic, where most every client completes the adult attachment interview. And so they do use this. This can be used in both clinical work or in research. So we're also working on another short assessment called the Relationship Styles Test, or the REST for short. And it's a little bit different. It's a one that can be used in more of a quick format to identify your style rather quickly. Now, of course, a battery of assessments is always better than a single assessment. So if you can use the AAI along with the relationship styles test, and the ECR is another one I recommend that measures attachment in terms of attachment-related anxiety and avoidance, that's recommended. But to get you started, the relationship styles test, or the REST, includes a brief story that is designed to activate your attachment system. We find people have a truer response to an assessment when their attachment system's activated. And it's designed to assess attachment-related anxiety, avoidance, comfort with closeness, as well as emotion regulation, strategies, and awareness and coherence in a multiple choice format. So it is in process and development in terms of a longer form, but the short form is available in the text, the 4 relationship styles, how attachment theory can help you in your search for lasting love. And I believe there's an abbreviated version online at the author's website as well. So is it true that there is hope when it comes to attachment? Yes. So the first step is identifying what your relationship style is. Once you identify your primary style and your secondary style, again, when I was coding AAI, we always had to identify primary style and secondary style, especially if someone had a firefighter style and had walked through the fires of loss or abuse. The idea is once they resolve that loss or abuse, then they would go into one of the other 3 organized styles. So again, why is it so important to know this, to spend time investigating your relationship style, to identify your relationship style, and then to identify a pathway towards increasing your level of functioning within that style, or even transitioning to a different, more secure or more organized style? Well, according to Mannix and Tangney, common adjustment problems such as depression, anxiety, marital discord, loneliness, hostility, these consist primarily of interpersonal beliefs and behaviors that are expressed in interpersonal settings and make little sense when examined outside of an interpersonal context. So, for example, with depression, people tend to isolate. I think of CBAS, which is an excellent form of treatment for depression that involves the situation analysis, which is always a situation of an interpersonal experience or interaction. Of course, loneliness is interpersonal, marital discord. Anxiety often involves anxiety related to interacting with other people. So as you can see, many of these challenges with adjustment are so closely tied to our interpersonal beliefs and our interpersonal behaviors. So we'll be talking quite a bit about attachment and how attachment informs social psychology. What about emotion and social psychology? It's been said attachment is regulation, and the way we regulate emotion, the way we do attachment, overlap. So we talked also about the early days and the foci of social psychology, but what about the more recent work? Well, along with one of the other textbook authors, Solovey, who was an author and developer of the Mayer-Solovey and Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test, also called the Mesquite for short, co-authored a chapter in the text we're using for our course, and they lamented the early 1970s focus of psychology being on primarily behavior and neglecting emotion to an extent. And they give a nod to the work of Dr. Paul Ekman. And Dr. Ekman and colleagues have focused on identifying observable emotions and coding them via facial expressions. And they even identified micro expressions. And you may have heard of this work. Some of my students some time ago told me when I was teaching a clinical skills class, hey, Dr. K, we'd really love you to watch the show. Have you seen this show called Lie to Me? And at first I had found the title a bit off-putting, but when I went to take a look at it, it was really quite a fascinating show based on reading micro expressions. So you may have seen that, and from my understanding, that's based on the work or informed by some of the work of Paul Ekman with dramatic license, of course. So Salve and colleagues emphasize the idea that psychology has come a long way in the acknowledgement of the important role of emotions and how they play a significant role in both social psychology and clinical psychology. And they acknowledge an important trend that we are moving towards more integration of emotion within psychology. And more recent work in social psychology has expanded the study of human emotion, and of interest to practicing clinicians are the emotions of the imperiled ego. And these include specifically jealousy, envy, shame, and guilt. And you may have seen the movie more recently that's called, what is it called? I'm holding one of the figurines here that is one of the characters from this, called Inside Out 2. Right? And so in Inside Out 2, each of these emotions is personified by a little character that lives in the mind of the protagonist. And so one of those characters is envy. So for example, she is greenish blue with stars in her eyes and a look of slight concern mixed with admiration on her face. There's also jealousy, as well as some other emotions. So if you haven't seen Inside Out 2 yet, highly recommend. I'd be happy to talk with you more about that if you're interested. Maybe do another video about that or talk about that in class. My friend Lindsay and I went to see it and really enjoyed it, and thought especially that anxiety was personified quite well. So how was the illness ideology challenged? Well, one exciting area of development in psychology was birthed from social psychology. And there was a whole new field birthed from social psychology. And that field is called positive psychology. And there's new concepts we're learning about research. They've also played a role in informing changes. So in positive psychology, there's been qualitative research and quantitative research that has helped promote that. Martin Seligman has developed an assessment called the VIA Signature Strengths Assessment, which you can also take to identify your strengths. And we'll talk more about this in class as well. But in addition to qualitative studies, psychologists have made use of some of the latest quantitative research strategies to unpack new findings in psychology. They've used mediation and moderation models that allow us to go beyond looking at correlations or just the idea that variable X may be related to variable Y, to ask more specific questions such as, having demonstrated that X is related to Y, these models press us to specify and test via what mechanisms. And as we have learned more, the authors emphasize the idea that, you can look at the mechanisms by which things are connected. We can go beyond just that relationship. And so that's exciting to see how the new statistical modeling is also helping us inform and develop in the field of social psychology. Looking at a Judeo-Christian worldview, I really appreciate this. Many people will be working with clients that approach things from a Judeo-Christian worldview. And if we think about this, one of the people I think about is Mr. Fred Rogers, who in a blog published by the American Counseling Association, they talked about how Mr. Rogers was America's children's television therapist. He was, interestingly, a Presbyterian minister who was ordained with a special ordination in children's television ministry. And he was on the air with his television program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, for over 30 years in the United States and Canada, with over 900 episodes. And he had such a transformative capacity to transform people. For example, when he went to advocate when they were going to shut down funding for public television, and he went before the Senate, before Senator Pastore, and he was able to transform this fellow from adversary to ally in just moments of time, to establish a collaboration and make a difference and a large social impact that is still living on even 20 years after Mr. Rogers' death. People are still quoting him. People are still gaining comfort from his work. People, even myself, is still feeling like he provides mentorship and teaching even years after he's been gone. So we looked at this question: what would a person have to do to have their work promote mental health for the next generation and leave a lasting impact, to be influencing lives for good 20 years after their death? So we used a qualitative study using the consensual qualitative approach, and a panel of experts. And the findings are portrayed in this book, The Mr. Rogers Effect: 7 Secrets to Bring Out the Best in Yourself and Others from America's Beloved Neighbor. And that text unpacked the 7 strategies that Mr. Rogers used to have this transformative impact, and how we can utilize these strategies as well. So just like positive psychology, Mr. Rogers' work on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood also emphasized concepts like resilience and promoted flourishing and thriving. He even changed the language that was used to talk with children to bring out the best in him, his colleagues and students of sorts, and they nicknamed it Freddish. So he had his own way of speaking to children, and he would often have people revise what they were saying, instead of saying, your parents can help you with your homework, because not every child had parents. For example, they could revise that to say, an adult can help you know what to focus your homework on, right? To focus on with your homework. You can read more about this in the Mr. Rogers Effect, but there's a list of specific strategies he used that we can also use that have such a lasting influence on others. He emphasized therapeutic factors like hope. Remember, hope we talked about earlier is one of Yalom's therapeutic factors. That's really important for our clients. And he demonstrated this in one episode where he was deliberating what he would like to give his viewers for Christmas. And he said what he would most want them to have is the gift of hope. And of course, that's what we hope to give to our clients as well. I hope this has piqued some interest for you in social psychology and reading and learning more about social psychology. I recommend using the Vital Source feature or Kindle feature to read your text and highlight the different concepts that you're reading and enjoying. So just if we look at this example from chapter 1, you can see you can even color code when you write. Let's see, when you select something and then you right click on it, you can add a note, you can copy it, and you can color code your highlights in different colors in Vital Source. So let's say we go to chapter 3, which is one of the chapters for this section, and you can go through and kind of see, okay, what do I want to focus on here? Looking at autobiographical memory. And here in the end of the first paragraph, we have this information about the model setting a conceptual agenda for understanding the development of narrative identity over time and narrative therapy. Very interesting concepts here. The starting point for the problem of identity, we go back to Erik Erikson, who we talked about earlier. He argued that adolescents and young adults face the challenge of constructing a unifying and purposeful ego identity. So here's that crisis we were talking about, Erikson's developmental crisis. Erikson argued that identity versus role confusion defines the central psychosocial problem for this period of the human life course. And then we can say, let's say for development, maybe we want to use orange. So we've selected that. Identity as an autobiographical story. Very fascinating when you're thinking about attachment. The AAI uses narrative, and coherence of narrative is one of the indicators of attachment security. But here we have more about life stories. The quality of early attachment bonds may ultimately come to shape how the person makes narrative sense of life in the adult years. Insecure attachments may predispose a person to construct a life story with a relatively negative or tragic narrative tone. So this is their take on the role of story in attachment. And we'll talk a lot more about this as we talk about the AAI. But I will tell you that one of the top indicators of a secure attachment style is not necessarily that a person had positive experiences in childhood, but rather that they have come to terms with and made sense of those experiences that they did have. Again, making sense of our journeys is more important than just having a positive journey. Making meaning of the journey is more important. And I found this interesting too. Erickson argued like revisionist historians, self-storytellers recast the past into a meaningful and convincing narrative, a myth that explains a self's origins and its identity. This explains why sometimes you might be talking with your mom or dad and revisiting old memories, and they have one version of the memory and you have another. Erickson argued that we tend to, like revisionist historians, rewrite our past memories and tell the stories to ourselves in different ways. They quote Erickson here and say, the adult is able to selectively reconstruct his past in such a way that step for step it seems to have planned him, or better, he seems to have planned it. Very interesting, right? Let's see. Here we have a highlighting green, life stories that show high levels of, generativity. This is it was interesting to read their work about generativity. What type of adults tend to be more concerned with generativity? Now, here's a tough question that we're really concerned with, especially when it comes to clinical work. How do people tell stories of life's defeats, suffering, pain, and loss? I definitely recommend reading a bit more about that and knowing what strategies people use, right? What are the most common strategies that people use? Here it says perhaps the most common response when it comes to having to narrate these events is to discount the event in some way. I will say when it comes to attachment, that's certainly the security guard strategy. The most extreme examples of discounting fall under the rubrics of repression, denial, and dissociation. Interestingly, numerous studies have shown that deriving positive meaning from negative events is associated with life satisfaction and indicators of emotional well-being. So this gives you a sense of how you can use some of the features on Vital Source to highlight. You can also go up here and have it read the text aloud to you. Many of these same features are available on Kindle as well. And of course, the great thing about that is that you can download your books and access them instantly and study social psychology and attachment and all these exciting concepts right in the palm of your hand. It's really pretty amazing. But I hope this helps ignite your interest as you continue to do your reading and prepare for your reading quizzes or opportunity to demonstrate your knowledge. I hope this gets you started. If you're interested in more videos, let me know. You can also check out more of my videos on YouTube. I have the Counselor's Bookshelf, some books where I've interviewed authors and shared those. There's also stats chats. There's some statistics tutorials, as well as some other resources. And you can also feel free to connect with me and follow me on Instagram if you'd like at the.empathetic.counselor. And I look forward to working with you in class. I hope this, again, gives you some concepts to contemplate until we talk again. God bless you. Thank you.